Hey guys, this is Comic Uno, and today I'm doing Comic Uno's Best Comics of the Week, and this is the show where I review all the comics I've read this week in one show. We go least favorite to best pick of the week and everything in between. In the comments below, let me know what your pick of the week was, because at the end of the video, we talk about the viewer's pick of the week, so you have a chance for your comment to be showcased on the episode. So let's jump in. We have 16 comics to talk about this week, and it's a pretty heavy haul for me, and a lot of number ones to discuss this week as well. So number 16 for me is The Amazing Spider-Man issue 92. You know, I really liked the last arc of The Amazing Spider-Man, really enjoyed the Queen's Goblin thing. But I really feel like this has been a filler arc, I guess getting to the end of Beyond. We have the Lizard, which is getting a .1 issue after the fact of seeing who the Lizard is and seeing this mutation of the character. But so I kind of wish the .1 came before that so we could kind of have a little bit more energy and a little bit more care for this arc in general. And then the rest is just very repetitive of Ben Reilly not having his memories and wanting to change that, and the effects of not having his memories to his emotional story arc. And even the artwork I don't feel like was as strong as it normally is. So overall, I just felt like this is a very forgettable issue, which is why I give that 2 stars, and then that is number 16. Moving on to number 15, the penultimate issue of the Joker Season 1, and that is the Joker issue 13. And this one, very fillerish in my opinion. It's a very point A to point B issue where we get to see how the characters kind of get into the final arena, how the Joker and Vengeance meets up, and then, I think her name is Vengeance, and then how Jim Gordon and who else is he teaming up with in the end here? Bane actually shows up in the end here. Of course, his relationship with Vengeance, and that's it. That's really the whole issue. We get some commentary about the rich in Gotham, or really the rich of the world, and we get a big prologue to that, and the rest of it is just kind of bringing the characters onto stage. So honestly, didn't love this issue. Excited to see what the finale is gonna bring, but I feel like this kind of simmered down the excitement of what the series is bringing. So overall, giving that 2 stars, and that is number 15. Moving on to number 14, which is Devil's Reign, issue 5, a story arc I've been very underwhelmed with, and what makes this even more underwhelming is that Woman Without Fear from last week actually spoiled what happened in this issue. So Matt Murdock, I guess, is dying. It kind of leaves on a cliffhanger where I'm like, wait, is there another page? Is it like missing or something? Because there's no caption at the end where it says the end. It just kind of, we don't know if he dies or not. And there was no ominous image. He's just, ready to punch, and that's kind of it. It feels like there was something missing at the end. And my biggest negative for this event is that there's too much going on. Anytime there's a scene where I'm starting to get interested, they just kind of moved on to the next character. There's just not enough room for this to breathe, and I feel like they didn't really use their side stories as well as they could have to make this story breathe a bit more. Artwork is still really great for this book, and, I think the cliffhanger would have been a better and bigger if we weren't spoiled for it. So honestly, it just didn't do much for me this issue. So overall, I'm going to give that 2.5 stars, and that is number we were up to number 14. I'm sorry, I gave that 2 stars. Moving on to number 13. A book I was really excited for, but I was let down with, and that's Trial of Amazons issue 1. Honestly, I was so let down I didn't end up reading part 2 because I didn't really want to pick up the rest of the event. I think the only issue I'll really get is the Wonder Girls issue because I really was enjoying Wonder Girl. Now, I think my biggest problem here was how many voices were being told, because by the end, and even in the front cover, you can see there are so many names on this. This goes to the artwork, to the writers. There's just too many people trying to stir the pot. There is, let's see how many writers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 writers on this book, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4 artists on this book, and it's a maybe 30-page book. It's maybe a little extra sized than normally, but you could really tell that there's just so much going on, and it was just kind of hard to get into in the beginning. And then finally, when something big does happen, which is the big event of Wonder Woman's mother being murdered, that's now we find out what the whole trial is about. Like, that was interesting. I kind of wish the issue began with that, and we got to see more of it, because I don't think the cliffhanger was enough for me to want to pick up more, just because the rest of it was so bogged down. Even the artwork, there are moments where it felt really stiff, even though the colors felt very bright. There wasn't any moment that was like, whoa, that looked really cool. So overall, giving that 2.5 stars. I was a bit disappointed with this one, especially because it's finally DC doing something that's not Batman, and I wish I enjoyed it more. So giving that 2.5 stars, and that is number 13. Moving on to number 12, a book I was actually really anticipating, and that is Little Monsters, issue 1 from Image Comics. I am a huge Jeff Lemire fan. His writing usually doesn't disappoint me. And I believe this is actually a Substack book. So Substack is kind of like the Netflix comic book version of the industry. And so this was released through his subscription service first, and then he has an overall deal with Image Comics and is doing all his books through there. So we get the printed version of it. And, I was excited because, again, he does really good family stuff. He does really good character stuff. And here I thought it kind of didn't utilize its space as well as it could. It's not until, kind of similar to Trials of Amazon, it's not until the end where you're like, oh, okay, so this is what the story is about. Because most of it is just like, here's this kid, here's that kid, and doesn't give you enough information about the kid to care about the kid. There's like, you see the cover. There's so many kids being introduced in this first issue, and there's no real hook. There's no character we're truly following until the end, where we find out, oh, the kids are the only one in this world, and now there's one extra person here, and how is that going to change their dynamic? Another thing I enjoyed about this issue, though, was the visuals. I love the grayscale, love the little bit of red. It was a beautiful book. I just feel like it didn't suck me in, pun intended, as much as I wanted it to, especially for a Jeff Lemire book, and especially for an issue 1, where honestly it kind of left me a little hollow, where I probably don't want to pick up the next issue. So I'm giving that 2.5 stars, and that is number 12, I believe. Moving on to number 11. A new era of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Matt Groom is now writing Power Rangers, and I will say I think the art kind of took me out a little bit. I feel like it was much darker than I expected. The faces definitely could have been more detailed, but I like the story. It's picking up the pieces after this big Eltrian war and focusing on characters we normally don't get a lot of focus on, especially Rocky. Learning more about his family was really interesting, and that was probably the moment I enjoyed the most of this issue. I do feel like the balancing act of trying to get all the voices in, is a hard balancing act, and I don't know if it totally injected it here, and maybe that's also because of an art style preference, but there's an interesting ending with maybe some different visuals that we're going to get from Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, underwater visuals that we're going to get, so that was cool, and I think it definitely has a lot of promise, and overall it was a pretty middle of the road debut, but I'm still excited to see where it's going to go and get a new voice for Power Rangers. So giving that 3 stars, and that is number 11. All right, moving on to number 10, which is Batgirls issue 4. So, this is exactly where we're in the middle here. That's kind of what this book feels like. It's always kind of middle of the road. And, the highlights are good highlights, where we get to see a lot from Cassie and Stephanie's friendship. I think the slice of life aspect is definitely what I'm most intrigued by, and just their dialogue together. But once it comes to the meat of the story, I'm not as interested. And this issue definitely focused on that a bit more. I think because of the gritty art style, it's a little harder to get into this tone of this book. And again, that overall plot. But, still having a good time with it. And I still love these 3 characters. And it's just a pleasure to see them on a monthly basis. So giving that 3 stars, and that is number 11. I'm sorry, that was number 10. Moving on to number 9, we were getting into those other issue 1s. So Radiant Red issue 1. And this was a good issue. Kind of follows the beats of what we saw in her main Radiant Black issue, about her origins and about her family and what her breakup with her fiance means, and her connection to being a kind of anti-hero, right? She doesn't want to touch the money that she stole, but she's still stealing money. And I like just getting a kind of cool window of this complex character, and I feel like this issue did a good job at that. I think the thing that kind of pulls me away is the art style. I'm not a huge fan of it. It's very blocky and very different from what we've been getting from Radiant Black, so that kind of deters me a little, but still really like the story. I think there's good ending, good character beats, and everything you want from a Radiant book. So giving that 3.5 stars, or maybe I gave it 3 stars. I think I gave it 3.5. No, I gave that one 3 stars, and that is number 9. Moving on to number 8, which is Captain Carter issue 1. Now, I'm not a big Captain America fan. I watched some of Agent Carter, and I watched the What If episode of the Captain Carter issue, Captain Carter story. And I have to say, I actually enjoyed this a little bit more than that What If issue. I feel like I had some more time to breathe, and exactly kind of my complaints of that first issue is like, you only have 20 minutes to tell this big story. I feel like it really slowed things down to compare what it's like to be in this modern world. And I'm not saying, Captain America hasn't explored this, but we do see it from a female perspective, but also we see it from a British perspective, which was really cool. Those were the moments I enjoyed the most here, was her just getting into action and just being herself. I would say when she interacts with other people here, especially like the more military aspect, that's where I feel like it gets a little bogged down, but I thought the artwork was solid for this book, and it was a good introduction to, a new angle for this character, especially in a Marvel world where there's a lot of comics trying to have a new perspective on characters and legacy characters especially. So overall, giving that 3.5 stars. I had a good enough time to definitely check out the next issue to see where it's gonna go. So moving on to we're up to number 7. And that is Hawkeye, Kate Bishop, issue 5. This is the last issue of this miniseries, and it's kind of everything I wanted. We finally got Cassie and America Chavez in this book, just an awesome tag team. We get to see Kate team up with her sister. The villains were just okay for the story, but I think it really was just about the character interactions. It was fun. It was light. Artwork's a little grittier than you expect for a lighter story, but yeah, it was just a fun ride. It was a good, just like palate cleanser, maybe for some of the larger books for this week. So giving that 3.5 stars, and that is I believe that was number 7. Moving on to number 6, the sequel, or the follow-up of the Nightwing issue, and it's Superman Son of Kal-El issue 9. And this is actually the same artist as well. So Bruno Redondo, who usually does Nightwing, also did this part for Superman. So really just feels like a part 2. They didn't even change the artist. And obviously Tom Taylor writes both books. And I will say the beginning was a little didn't move as much as I wanted to. I didn't really quite care about the main plot. But once we got to the house and we got to see, Lois interacting, and then just the more heart-to-heart between Nightwing and Superman, and comparing taking up Legacy, I thought that was the most interesting aspect of this issue. We got the nice call back to the lollipop, and really some beautiful visuals. We get to see the kind of bat wings that we've seen from Batman the Animated Series from Nightwing, and most recently the Batman movie. So that was just cool visually to see. It was just awesome to see these two very different power sets team up with each other, again, from a visual perspective. So I liked the issue. I thought it was fun. I still think the main plot could have used some help, but in the end, I think it tied very well with, people are not going to trust John anymore because they think he killed somebody. And it was like, oh, and that ties into this more truth journalism aspect that also is now tying Lois Lane and Nightwing. So I like that aspect, and I thought it ended on a good note for some promising story for the Superman series in particular. So overall, giving that 3.5 stars, and that is number 6. Moving on to number 5, which is Thor issue 23, and this was one hell of an issue because we get to see the aftermath of Odin dying, and you get a really good father-son moments here, and also delves into the connection of Thor's a connection and relationship with his hammer. And by the end of the issue, he defeats his hammer in the spirit of it. So what is Thor without his hammer? And then the hammer becomes Odin. So this is gonna already, become such an interesting relationship and a new dynamic for Thor. It's gonna be refreshing, and I was like, oh, that's such an interesting take. And the Thor legacy and comic always had to do with the father-son relationship, but now it's to a whole nother level. So I was like, oh, that's a really cool cliffhanger. I want to see where this series takes it. And the artwork is so nice and gritty, but the colors are really nice and bright, and it just totally works for this series. So overall, giving that 3.5 stars, and that is number 5. Moving on to number 4, which is Seven Secrets, issue 15. Every issue that comes out just reminds me of just watching a really great anime, and this issue is definitely not an exception, where we get a lot revealed here, where we learn one of the secrets has to do with this demon that needs to grow up. There's some big battles between our heroes and our villains, and then by the end of the issue, we learn that Casper is actually the seventh secret. So we get some real movement here, some real personal angst here as well, with some wonderful action and some really good death in this issue as well, but with Casper's old bully, which I was like, oh, that was such a good redeeming moment, kind of a Flash Thompson moment there. It was just a really well balanced issue with a lot of great action. So overall, giving that 4 stars, and that is number 4. Moving on to number 3, a book I wasn't even originally going to get, but I was pleasantly surprised with, and that is Punisher, issue 1. Honestly, I only got it because from a reviewing perspective, it had a lot of buzz, and I was like, let me give this one a shot. Punisher has swords now. And I know a lot of people were upset with it, but I thought this issue did a beautiful job at showing why he needed swords. And you open up with this gun scene and this really haunting scene where someone gets shot, and you're already kind of like, oh my god, you're like shook up. And then you get into the hand story of how did Frank get involved with them, and why is he just using knives, and what does that action look like? And then the girl from the beginning of the story is actually still alive, which is interesting, and Frank is entangled with her. So I just thought it was a really well done first issue, and a really well balanced issue from an action standpoint. From a plot standpoint, you're like, oh, I'm interested in issue 2 with the things that are laid out here. So I just thought it was really interesting. I feel like Marvel needed to do something different with Punisher, because they've had so many volumes with him, and then it just began and end. So it's really nice just to see, a good jumping on point and just something different with the character. And the artwork was really good for this one too. I really like the opener. It's the same artist that does Outcast from Image. Thought that really brought into the hauntingness of it. So overall, giving that 4 stars, and that is number 3. Moving on to a book I was super excited for, one of my most anticipated books of the year, and that is Naomi Season 2, Issue 1. I love the first volume of Naomi. I know Naomi's been doing a lot of stuff that I haven't been reading, like Justice League, and I read Young Justice, so I did read that, but I have not been catching up on Justice League, and I was a little worried about that. Is like, oh, is this only going to talk about Justice League? And I think this book actually did a really good job at explaining what's going on in Justice League without bogging us down. Now, there are moments where you're like, oh, maybe they're explaining a little bit too much, but it made it new reader friendly, and I like the beats of just going back to Naomi's slice of life, personal narrative, and I feel like they transition into that very easily, and the artwork, as always, is mind-blowing, and we get to see a lot of the family tension in this issue, where they were super close in the beginning of the series, and now with everything that's happened, they don't really know how to interact with each other anymore. And this brings even more mystery towards Naomi and her adoptive family as well. And I just thought it was a really well balanced issue, and it did a good job at getting us back into a story that hasn't been around for a while, with some amazing artwork and an amazing story to want us to read issue 2. So overall, giving that 4 stars, and that is number 2. Moving on to my number 1 pick, which is SpiderGwen, Gwenverse issue 1. And there's so many reasons why this is my pick of the week. A, because it's SpiderGwen. But in all honesty, it's because I don't know what I was expecting with this book. I think I was expecting what we've been getting, kind of the what if Miles Morales is, and it's just like, well, how about if Gwen was Thor? And that's just kind of the story. And how about if we have 5 Gwens in one panel? And that's the story. But Tim Seeley does such a good job at making it more than that, making the multiverse story actually a personal story. And that's why this is number 1. I was just kind of shocked at how that was done. And, I miss Spider-Gwen. I miss Earth 65. I miss that world. And it gave that world back to us. It gave those narratives back with still doing this multiverse stuff, and making it about Gwen. So in the beginning, we get where's Gwen at after Ghost Spider? She's not connected to her band once again. Mary Jane's upset. Her dad's upset that she's heroing when he doesn't want her to. And then she's like, I kind of want to escape from this. I'm going to, travel the multiverse and kind of escape from myself. myself in my own world. And she learns by seeing other versions of herself that there's no escaping it, and there's heightened versions of her. And the dialogue is just really well done. There's moments where Captain Stacy mentions, like, oh, I don't love the idea of you being a hero in the 616 because that's a world where we're both dead. So there's some really good character moments in that regard. And just some of these new heroes as well, I thought were built well, because it wasn't just like, here's a random Thor. We're introduced to this Thor for a couple of pages. We were like, oh, okay, so that's why they're there. And the artwork is really solid for this book too, kind of reminiscent of what we've gotten in the previous volumes of SpiderGwen. So it worked for this book as well. And just a really solid story where I'm like, oh, I want to see more of this, and I'm glad it's not just a multiverse story. It is a Spider-Gwen story, and could only be done with Gwen. So overall, I give that 4 stars. I really enjoyed this one, and I was pleasantly surprised by the concept. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. This is Comic Uno. Let me know in the comments below what are your favorite comics of the week, and the viewer's pick of the week from last week was Dark Knights of Steel, and here are some comments about that. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. This is Comic Uno, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.